Where have I been the last 10,000 years, you ask? Well, I've been writing this dang script for this dang video on this dang game that I teased back in February. Dang it, I'm not gonna let this video take as long as Resident Evil 6 took, or is still taking. Gonna finish that one day, I promise. I have been looking forward to working on this video for a long time, in that I was going to get JRPGs back into my life one way or another, and what better way to accomplish that than to work it into my favorite video format that I have. It's an exciting prospect. Final Fantasy IX is a well-loved game. Everybody who hasn't played it knows that they should, and you're about as likely to find a person who actively dislikes this game as often as you'll find someone who's never heard the name William Shakespeare. It is a timeless story about adventure, romance, politics, war, and of all things, intergalactic mystery. So, okay, timeless might not be the perfect word to use, but the characters are memorable and the world is deep and multifaceted, and it's one of history's favorites. So clearly, this is the perfect candidate for a For Better or Worse video, the format wherein I talk about games I already have an opinion on, but if I'm honest, I'm not entirely sure I ever settled on an opinion for Final Fantasy IX. I don't really have strong feelings for this game, one way or the other, and that's probably one of the big reasons why I was so eager to replay it. We begin the game with a brief scene of a small boat fighting its way through a storm. We catch glimpses of two people on board, one a young woman and the other a small child, before it all flashes away, and what do you know, it was all a dream! The young woman having the dream is dressed in an elegant and extravagant dress and is looking out over a crowded cityscape from the window of a castle as a gigantic airship, the Prima Vista, moves in from the horizon. On that ship is our hero Zidane, who meets up with his friends, and together they are looking for their boss. It isn't long before they are attacked by said boss, who is in disguise, and a battle begins. When it's over, it was all in good fun, as bossman Baku wants to make sure that his boys are in tip-top shape for what's to come. The group converges and begins to outline the plan one last time before its Operation Go. The group of ruffians are revealed to be Tantalus, the infamous band of daring thieves. Literally a quote from their self-description. They are posing as a theater group on their way to the Kingdom of Alexandria on a mission to kidnap Princess Garnet during their performance. After the plan has been reviewed, we shift focus to a small boy in strange clothes named Vivi to begin the action of play, as he and many others are headed to the castle to see this supposedly renowned theater group perform. But wouldn't you know it, the ticket he presents at the box office is a fake, and while wandering despondent through the streets of the town, happens upon another young boy who is determined to sneak into the show at any cost. Vivi joins him, and they begin their infiltration of the castle. There's a lot of stuff going on in the intro of this game, and we'll get to most of it in a moment, but one of the big things I really like about this very moment of the game is that here is where we start to see just how diverse the world of Final Fantasy IX really is. The city of Alexandria is full to bursting with all kinds of different people, humans of all shapes and sizes, anthropomorphic animals, and fantasy creatures like Moogles and whatever this guy is. Heck, Zidane even has a tail, and Vivi, having been designed after the classic look of the Black Mage from the early Final Fantasy games, is a distinct individual amidst all of the hustle and bustle. There is no one else here who even looks like him, and nobody seems to notice or care. This on its own is a really cool way to convey to the player just what kind of a fantasy game we are playing, and it puts it in context with or against other Final Fantasy games. Starting off, there are no illusions about the similarities to our own world here. The affect of this game is rooted much more in the realm of fairy tale flight of fancy rather than pseudo-science fiction or dystopic futurism. Castles, princesses, mighty airships, strange and wonderful peoples all occupy the same space in this world. The characters we will be playing as, both the ones we've already met and the ones we will meet as we continue, are representative of the far-reaching and diverse world that we find ourselves in. This is in stark contrast to other games in the series, such as Final Fantasy X and XII, which only had one non-human playable character apiece, and of 5, 8, and 13, which in fact have exclusively human playable characters. Back in the story, as night falls, Tantalus is in position. The play is about to start, and all of the nobles look on eagerly. Even Queen Brane herself and Princess Garnet are in attendance, though the princess is clearly preoccupied. What follows is an extended scene detailing Tantalus's play, peppered with moments of player involvement, such as a confrontation with the Wicked King in the form of a boss battle, and a choreographed sword fight between Zidane and Blank. There's a lot that goes into this sequence to really sell the fact that this is an event, with all the pageantry afforded such a special occasion. The audience will tip you based on how well you pull off the sword fight, and the characters can use stage effects magic that look like the spells you would normally see in a Final Fantasy game but do no actual damage, which I thought was kind of a nice effect. Soon after their performance, Zidane and Blank sneak off to track down the prize of the heist, Princess Garnet, only to run headlong into her as she is making her way out of the castle. Well, what do you know, the princess herself is in fact running away. What a coincidence! In all of the hubbub of trying to avoid her bodyguards and the castle knights, the runaways wind up on stage and the group is forced to improv their way through the remainder of the play. Eventually, Vivi, pursued by some ushers wanting to see a ticket, adds to the confusion, and in a hilarious accident, all is revealed and the jig is up. After a battle in front of the whole audience and a daring escape on the Prima Vista, our heroes escape with their hides intact and the princess safely on board. The intro of Final Fantasy IX is pretty wonderful. There is so much that is put into place here for the rest of the game that this whole sequence is almost an epic unto itself. It doesn't try to explain its world or dwell on mystery. The action of the plot is already moving full steam ahead here, and we will be dealing with the consequences of this intro for hours to come. Contrary to my just having said that they escaped safely, the Prima Vista was in fact damaged during its escape, and we crash land in the evil forest. Life comes at you fast, and this game comes at you even faster. When all of the cutscenes are done, here is where the game really opens the floodgates and lets us sink or swim in the gameplay. Ignoring the bafflingly poorly thought out and completely front-ended tutorial this game offers, gameplay is very similar to the Final Fantasies of just a few years before this one. We are given an environment to explore, and we can move anywhere in that available space until a plot event or random battle starts shaking stuff up. Battle is your very standard JRPG active time battle system, wherein characters will take time to prepare a battle action, represented by these here time bars, before being asked if they want to attack an enemy, use an item, cast a spell, or use one of a group of innate abilities attuned to that character, such as Zidane's thievery arts or Garnet or Aiko's summon spells. In the great tradition of Final Fantasy, this game experiments with character growth and customization in its own way. This installment demanding that the abilities our characters can use be learned by equipping certain items, weapons, or apparel. These abilities are completely removed from the standard growth levels the characters grow through, and can only be used while its corresponding item is equipped, and only after the ability has been mastered is it theirs to keep. While many of these abilities are shared and can be used by multiple characters, an equal number of them are only accessible by certain characters, creating the unique abilities that I mentioned before. The effect of all of this? Defined character attributes. Something that I love and kind of lament the lack of in other games in the Final Fantasy series. A friend of mine once joked that Final Fantasy doesn't give you characters, they give you a visual coding language that you can then use to take the same character and make it a slightly different character, or all of the same if you want. Outside of the story of each individual game, I'm kind of inclined to agree with my friend here. Starting with the job system in Final Fantasy III, or even as far back as the original Final Fantasy, if you want to get technical, so many installments in the series adopted ability or growth systems that really reduced the character definitions in the individual games. I mean, with the junction system in 8, the only thing that set the characters apart were the weapons they used, and their limit breaks. Same with the license board in 12, except that everybody could use all of the weapons in that game. The paradigm system in 13, or even taking away the definitions of character classes or jobs, and just smearing abilities and even individual stat growth points all over an all-purpose roadmap, if you will. But aside from the pool of shared abilities characters can learn from items, Final Fantasy IX makes it clear from the get-go which characters can do what. Zidane is the only thief you're going to have in your party. Steiner and Freya are slight variations on the tank character build. Quina is your only blue mage, Vivi is your only black mage, and the only real faltering point in this is Garnet and Aiko, who have a very similar set of commands, but different individual abilities within those archetypes. But not only gives the game a reason to allow two separate parties to each have a white mage, but also carries some pretty heavy story implications, tying a character's moveset back to their backstory, something that I think a lot of the Final Fantasy games I just called out a moment ago have been missing over the years. Aside from the assigned mechanical growth of the characters, and maybe Garnet's eidolons, there isn't really a whole lot of storytelling by design in this game. Pretty much all of this game's important story and character development takes place in the cutscenes, and that's not me disparaging the game. The story and characters that we do get here are some of the best. We might have gotten a brief glimpse of what our characters were like in the introduction of the game, but it's here that we really start to see their personalities take root. Here is where we happen upon one of the more interesting points to begin a story, as our characters are all here for different reasons, and have differing opinions on what should happen next. Contrary to other Final Fantasy games, wherein the player characters are learning about their situation from more experienced people, or are being assigned to go places with people they are already somewhat familiar with, Final Fantasy IX starts us with 4 characters who by and large don't know each other and are trying to coordinate a way out of a disaster. Steiner is obsessed with carrying out his assigned duty, specifically protecting Princess Garnet and delivering her safely back to Alexandria Castle. The princess herself is anxious to get to the neighboring state of Lindblum, for reasons she hasn't divulged yet, and Vivi is adrift in the world, unsure of himself and really only here because of circumstance. The big outlier in this case is Zidane, who comes off as the chronically laid-back, dripping with personality good guy to have around in any situation, who is just with it enough to feel a sense of responsibility for the people he had a part in dragging into all of this, even going so far as to quit Tantalus in order to guide his new charges out of danger. Though it wouldn't be a stretch to think that he's just in it because he's hoping to get his mac on with the princess, I don't know. Right from the get-go, all of the characters we get are characterized very well, and we can get a strong first impression of what we can expect as time goes on. In fact, the entire cast of 8 main characters we go adventuring with in this game really are a strange group that reflect off of each other quite nicely. They are consistent, and their interactions show that no one person is simply a foil for another. They all at least have tangential relationships with each other, opinions on one another, and it really makes the group feel alive and vibrant. Might not seem like much, but go play Chrono Cross. Seriously, it's a fantastic game and one of my all-time favorites, but with completely interchangeable characters, and 45 of them nonetheless, it leaves a lot of empty space between the characters and the story that they're in. The arcs and motivations that these characters have, however, range from tragic to comical, even to downright charming. It might be one of the most dissonant groups of friends or allies in this genre. The most obvious example of this dissonance being Freya and Quina. Freya is an old friend of Zidane's from the Kingdom of Bermesia who asks for the party's assistance after she learns of the destruction of her home and the impending doom of their neighboring country. Along the way, we also learn of her quest to search the world over for her long-lost lover, Sir Fratley, who she finds and speaks to just long enough to discover that he does not remember her because of some sort of amnesia, and then whisks off never to be seen again until the very ending of the game. Conversely, Quina's journey and motivation centers entirely around eating a lot of food. Yeah, their entire goal in life is to see the world and eat all of the food along the way. And basically, everybody else's arc fits on that spectrum somewhere. One thing that almost everybody has in common, though, is that a lot of their immediate development comes as a result of the character's proximity to Zidane, with the possible exception of Vivi, who more or less sticks around with the party because he has nowhere else to go, and they happen to stumble upon the events that lead to his self-discovery almost completely incidentally, and Freya, who is, as I've already pointed out, an old friend of Zidane's to some degree, and thus is more free to turn her attention outwards to the world around her. But for the most part, all of the other characters have their moments enhanced or even driven by Zidane's presence in their lives. A big part of Aiko's motivation is her being so enamored with having people around for really the first time in her life that she falls in love with the first guy she sees. Yeah, guess who that is. Steiner's dedication to his job puts him at odds with Zidane early on, but eventually gives way to show that his honor-bound execution of duty isn't just a response to Zidane causing trouble, and nothing changes in his demeanor or decorum even as his opinion of the thief and the rest of the group starts to evolve. Amaranth's entire arc is based on a single time that Zidane was a dick to him years ago, and him having to learn to manage resentment and not let it cloud over friendships or relationships. It doesn't really take hold, but, you know, baby steps. For as much as this game becomes rather one-note when it continues to defer back to its protagonist in moments of character development, it does kind of make sense. In addition to the brief description I gave him a few paragraphs back, Zidane ultimately comes off as a practiced people person. He's lived out loud and surrounded himself with friends and acquaintances. Whenever someone in the group is struggling with a conundrum, he's willing to lend a hand or an outside perspective. Anytime a friend of his is in trouble, he has no problem coming to their rescue. He's a goofball and all that, but remains surprisingly mature when it counts. He is a frustratingly perfect protagonist, or at least I found him to be until he finally comes across his own crises to deal with, like when he starts to realize that his feelings for Garnet are a little more real than he seems to have experienced before, followed by some pretty heavy story stuff when it is revealed to him by the villain of the game what his true nature is. As Zidane and company make their way towards Lindblum and up out of the untamed wilderness, we begin to see how this game is both intensely character-focused while not forgetting about the larger world around them. The game makes ample use of its active time event system, or ATE for short, a way by which the game affords the player a chance to view unrelated events experienced by our characters when they are separated, or even characters outside of the main party having their own adventures, allowing the game as a whole to appear as big as it really is, not limiting its scope to the view screen determined by our characters and their immediate location. In the village of Dali, we use ATE to see all 4 of our characters act independently of each other for a while, furthering their own goals and beginning to experience some character growth. Steiner carries on as an honorable to a fault doofus, continuously looking for a way to get Garnet
Garnet back to Castle Alexandria, Vivi takes some time to indulge his wide-eyed curiosity, and Garnet herself, having decided to travel under the pseudonym Dagger, which is how I will be referring to her for the rest of the video, tries to fit in, far removed from the royal trappings of her usual everyday. But before long, our would-be heroes find themselves involved in the troubling goings-ons of a troubled world, coming to a head when we find ourselves under attack by three sinister figures known as the Black Waltzes.
This is the perfect way to begin the rising action of this game. Everything up until this point has been framed by our main characters and their accidental adventure that began as the result of a whimsical kidnapping/running away of a princess. Coming face to face with the Black Waltzes, however, makes it clear that Queen Brane is accessing dark powers far beyond the reckoning and understanding of a sensible world. The political powers of the land are shifting in dark and mysterious ways. We can see this in Dagger's concern over her mother's actions, and it is compounded when we finally come face to face with the Regent of Lindblum.
Despite the peaceful hustle and bustle of Alexandria we saw during the beginning of the game, the attitude in Lindblum is much less at ease. Citizens talk idly about an impending war with Alexandria, and we learn that Lindblum has in fact been making contingent military plans against their neighbor for some time already. Regent Cid, who has been transformed into an insect as a result of an unrelated plot thread, in case you're wondering about his appearance, admits that the growing tensions between the two nations were such that it was in fact he who ordered Tantalus to kidnap the princess, owing to a promise he made to her late father should such a situation arise. Even as the people try to put aside their anxiety by celebrating the annual hunt festival, we are alerted to the devastation wrought on the neighboring country of Burmecia by Alexandria. From here on out, the situation only escalates. The saber rattling between nations eventually gives way to the destruction of not one, not two, but 4 major city-states on the Mist Continent. The known world is plunged into a violent and poisonous war that makes no sense to the people that it affects. The game does such a good job of conveying the tragedy of the wider world around us, while drawing us up into the upper echelons of political powers that have failed to keep the peace. It is at this point that the world of Final Fantasy IX really starts to open itself to us, and the context it brings, I think, is an important one, specifically just how wild and untamed much of it is. The hustle and bustle of the lively and crowded cityscapes of Alexandria and Lindblum give way to a barren and largely empty outside world. There's lots to see and stuff to do, but signs of civilization are few and far between. This is nothing new for Final Fantasy, and many adventure games in general, wherein a map or overworld will be largely lifeless due in large part to the demands of designing such a crowded world. Cities and landmarks will be placed far apart, kind of the original large but empty issue people take with some open world games nowadays, but Final Fantasy IX makes an interesting creative choice, in that they make it clear that the landscape surrounding us is covered in a strange fog, which we learned about when we first crashed into the evil forest. Mist is known to have strange effects on people, even grow or create monsters out of seemingly nothing. The game's addition of Mist is great because it gives a solid story reason for the map to be as bare and seemingly lifeless as it no doubt made logistical sense to be. We find evidence of society and the ruins of progress throughout our journey, the game in fact soon after revealing that the entirety of the known civilized world exists on a single continent, with only a vague awareness of the other landmasses across the ocean, even giving them names such as the Lost Continent and Forgotten Continent. This in its own right is a significant yet largely unspoken element of the story that will be unfolding as the game goes on, but it becomes obvious that this is a world that has suffered or is suffering its apocalypse. The last pockets of a familiar world are isolated and separated from each other by vast emptiness, and the encroaching darkness on the horizon seems to be moving in for the kill. It is an uneasy world perched on the precipice of disaster and war, and our characters stand next to the caretakers of such a reality. From this vantage point, we can see the entire breadth of the situation. Politicians and rulers, aggressors and resistors alike, who squabble and go to war over things that make no sense to the common citizen, ruining lives and livelihoods, all the way down to the people who rebuild, eke out a happy existence, and look onwards to the rest of their lives despite what may come. Experiencing the culture that exists in this world, despite the hardships that frame it, is oddly comforting to me, and things like Vivi playing jump rope with other kids in Alexandria, or witnessing people's varied reactions to Lindblum's local delicacies not only assist in the act of world building, but gives that world a purpose and ambiguity that respects both sides of existence, both tragedy and contentment. I love the world of Final Fantasy IX, and I honestly think it alone is one of Square Enix's finest creations. Music obviously plays a huge role in this game. Final Fantasy IX was the last in the series to feature no voice acting. Any and all emotions are conveyed through straight dialogue or exaggerated body language. And for as much as the sound design in this game is well done for the time it was released, it still dwells in the pseudo-retro effect of requiring a bit of imagination to fully put it into place. This is true of a lot of games of the era, and as such, a lot of the real power of the moment in these games lies in the music.
So how is it that I, baffling even myself in this rather dark confessional, don't think terribly highly of the soundtrack of this game? Yes, in spite of the enemies I'm no doubt making in this moment, I can't help but feel that Final Fantasy IX doesn't have a particularly strong soundtrack. It's functional, and it's alright. It's adequate, I guess, is the word I'm looking for in this situation.
The soundtrack as a whole covers all of the ground that it needs to. It conveys action and suspense very well. It has great quiet moments of emotional reflection, and for the most part adds to the current environment properly and appropriately. I think they did an exceptional job of telling you about the town that you're in with the music as much as talking to any NPC will do. Lindblum is a massive metropolis content to lumber through the ages exactly like it is right now. Treno is a party town built around its nightlife first and foremost, and Clara is the quiet and peaceful haven of a people who just want to be left alone. I'm obviously not going to deny that there are some terrific singular tracks in here, but I can't help but think that Nobuo Uematsu was holding his A material back for Final Fantasy X, which, believe it or not, came out only a year later. It even seems like there was a layer of separation between composer and designer here, as I have to wonder at some pretty dissonant moments here. I mean, what is with the ice caves? This is a little weird. And Loss of Me is one of my favorite pieces of video game music, which a friend showed me years before I would actually play the game. It's beautiful, accessible, poignant, and where do they play it? Whenever former adversary henchwoman Beatrix dips into a moment of does he, doesn't he. I mean, come on, this is one of the only songs I know that can hold a candle against To Zanarkand, and you're gonna play it for when she's wondering if Goofus over here is crushing on her or not? In addition to no voice acting, Final Fantasy IX is also the last in the Final Fantasy series to have an overworld map. It's probably not something a lot of people think about, but for such an integral part of a genre, something that had become an unspoken tradition in gaming to essentially disappear, well, it made sense that the last major iteration of it would receive a proper send-off. It's not necessarily big or even bigger than other overworld maps were in Final Fantasy games. There are 4 large landmasses and stuff to do on all of them. And no, I'm not just talking about cities or landmarks. As early in the game as Disc 1, the game makes available a little side quest called Chocobo Hot and Cold, wherein you come across a chocobo, aptly named Choco, who is hoping to make friends and see the world. Mean the Moogle shows you how to ride and call for Choco and basically facilitates your new friendship, then teaches you about Chocobo Hot and Cold, a game in which you instruct Choco to slam his head into the ground in various places for a whole minute, hoping to find hidden items there. What at first seems like a supreme waste of time, essentially digging up some gil or various consumable items, eventually leads you to unearth something called a chocograph, a stone tablet that has a picture of the landscape on it. It is then that Mean reveals that this is an indication of where more treasure could be buried, and encourages you to find the place indicated on the chocograph to dig it up. This right here begins one of the craziest treasure hunts I've ever been on. Extensive and expansive, taking you on an every nook and cranny style tour of what I affectionately refer to as the last JRPG overworld map. The chocographs you find will lead you all over the world, all 4 landmasses, and even out into the straight-up ocean, eventually leading you to another place to hunt for chocographs, as well as not 1, but 2 whole secret areas outside of the normal world map. Chocobo's Air Garden and Chocobo's Paradise, which themselves offer their own side quests to consider. And secret areas aside, this whole escapade is just a secret item bonanza, which is not a word I throw around lightly. You find one-of-a-kind cards for Tetramaster, you get all kinds of consumables, secret items like an optional beachwear set, because why not? The Chocobo treasure hunt is also how you ultimately come by pretty much all of the super weapons in the game. You get Freya's dragon's hair this way, Dagger's whale whisker this way, Zidane's ultimate weapon is unrelated to the search, but you use Choco to find it. The only super weapon that you find elsewhere is Steiner's, which you find in Deguero, which is a whole other hotbed of side questy goodness. When you eventually acquire a mode of flight, you can fly to a previously inaccessible area of the game, a sort of city inside a mountain situation where magicians, academics, and treasure hunters gather to share information and celebrate discovery. There is so much stuff going on here! For instance, in order to find Steiner's Excalibur, you have to find the old man who asks you for a magical fingertip as his dying wish. Seems like no problem, we're always finding all kinds of crazy stuff in this big weird world of ours, but this little fetch quest involves bidding on 3 secret items at the Treno auction house, then selling them to the 3 people who are looking for them, and only then will you have the opportunity to bid on the magical fingertip, which wound up costing a by no means reasonable amount of gil. The amount of wonderful stuff to do in this game is just staggering. In addition to all of the things I've already mentioned, there's also an eccentric bird lady who wants you to find zodiac coins for her over the entire progress of the game, several blends of coffee that you can bring to a connoisseur who will give you purely aesthetic decorations for the Tantalus hideout, a side quest involving missing people around Lindblom so late in the game and so trivial that it took forever for people to find it, and wasn't widely reported until 2013, a full 13 years after the game's release. Secret items are literally everywhere in this game. I'm serious, I couldn't even fathom how much extra stuff there was to find when I busted open a guide for this game, not to mention turning all of those treasure chests and hidden items into a side quest in of themselves to give you a grade based on how many of them you manage to find, and when you find enough of them and report to Alleyway Jack or whatever else he calls himself, he will then reveal to you that he is actually this game's appearance of Gilgamesh, and that, everybody watching right now, is a thing that is so cool I could probably make an entire video about it, and just might now that I have brought it up.
I know it seems like I'm getting really overexcited about side quests here, but they really are one of my favorite aspects of JRPGs and just video games in general. They're one of the things that I look forward to the most when booting up a Square RPG, and if I'm honest, even though I thought I had a pretty solid grasp of this game the first 1.5 times I played it, I was flabbergasted at how much stuff there was still for me to find. It added such a romantic mystery to this game that only translates into a desperate need to revisit other ones in the series or to finally get around to the ones I haven't played yet.
As you might have guessed, the mist has a source, it has a purpose, and it even has a figure that we can connect to it. Not far into the game, we learn of a man named Kuja, who has been working in the shadows, ultimately manipulating Queen Brane, using her to spread chaos and destruction throughout the world. For most of the game, Kuja serves the purpose of putting a face on the larger, lingering threat that is the pervasive mist. And aside from being well characterized and drawing a general anxiety from the party at large, doesn't really come into his own or reach down to the characters in any real way until late into the game. But by and large, Kuja does a great job of integrating himself into the political landscape of the larger story, and becomes a much needed focal point for the audience, allowing them to navigate the situation much easier, because what's really going on is kinda heavy. The intricacies of the implications of what is happening are the kind that will steamroll a story into a very large but shallow shape. Big political stories like this one are often quite deep and well thought out, but the nature of their delivery leaves the audience out in the cold, demanding that the game, show, movie, or book spoon-feed the facts of the situation to its audience up front, making the whole affair seem shallow. These are stories that are hard to relate to. In some sense, there's nothing for us to give back to the story. There's no give and take. But thankfully, for as much as the weight of the entire world threatens to railroad the story into a mess of political intrigue and war room meetings, the game does a great job of keeping everything personal, and having the larger events of the plot reflect off of the characters as individuals. Dagger is the daughter of the aggressor monarch, dazed and mortified by her mother's willingness to sow destruction on such a scale. Freya is effectively an emissary from the 2 destroyed kingdoms of Bermesia and Clara, and Vivi, while not a major player in the political game, suffers a deep existential crisis when he discovers that he is nothing more than a defective unit from a manufactured army used by Queen Brane to achieve her destructive means. Kuja is the symbol and agent of everything that is wrong with the world, giving us something to latch onto, and even brings Zidane into his moments of falter and hesitation when he reveals the truth behind Zidane's true origin. This game takes its characters to some epically difficult places and uses the story to do it. The experiences of the characters we play as in this game are far-reaching and varied. I gave brief explanations of their arcs earlier on, but nobody in the party is just a framed photo of a developed character. Each arc, no matter how trivial in the larger sense, takes a different path towards completion. We can see this pretty clearly in how Amarant comes to his realization rather quietly after his chats with Aiko and Freya, who are pretty much his character opposites, whereas Freya doesn't really get closure on her conflicts, requiring her to stoically look forward into a new reality for her people. Quina continues to dive into absurdity and achieve a sort of food-based Zen enlightenment. I think my favorite arc in this game is actually Steiner's. Right from the outset, he makes himself out to be an important, larger-than-life knight in Castle Alexandria. His every interaction with people is a constant reminder of this. He has found his hill to die on, and damn it, he's gonna die on it if it kills him. sort of becoming this game's religious zealot character. Anybody who challenges him or stands in his way is immediately put into the problem category. But as the game progresses, he slowly comes to realize that what is happening around him is so much bigger than himself, and he must allow his ego and obsessive dedication to his duty deflate a little bit and start to interact with people on their level. He is a big character who learns how to be small, which is kind of the opposite of Vivi, who begins the game sheltered and unaware, only to broaden his horizons and discover how much the cruel world actually does affect him. In short, this game is huge, both in what it does to the world it takes place in and the characters it portrays. I'd be lying if I said it didn't seem to go off the rails a little bit, but for as much as the final plot points of the game kind of turn into an overfilled pot set to boil, the themes presented across the entire game stay pretty well intact and represented despite how far from the road it seems to go. The meaning of life is to give life meaning. You are important, even if the world says you are not. It's kind of a catch-all philosophy, but it is wonderfully represented in a world that has no reason to celebrate or be comforted in light of larger events or the inevitability of tragedy in the shadows, but still finds reasons to enjoy the arts, culture, and life. Zidane as a character captures this perfectly, manifesting it in each of the people he has connected with. Dagger even says as much in the ending's "Where Are They Now" segment as she reflects on how her outlook has changed since their adventure.
The game as a whole finishes very strong. This is a prime example of a story that explores a true range of emotions. After such a huge upheaval in the lives of these characters, it leaves them at a happy ending, in a world that will never be the same again, having grown and learned from their experiences. The ending is loaded with warm, fuzzy feelings that I will admit even got to this old jaded gamer here, and I can't even claim any childhood attachment to this game, so there. It's the vocal ballad over the end credits. Not usually my thing, but yeah.
In the world of JRPGs, Final Fantasy IX is a model citizen. Everything from the sprawling, far-reaching story to the deep, intricate world, the seemingly endless ways a player can dive into that world, it's all here, and now I feel I can understand how it is that people hold this game up as the pinnacle of the Final Fantasy series. There's enough here for everybody to have their own reasons to love this game, and in spite of this long-ass bastard of a video you just watched, I didn't even get to talk about all of mine. The summons, optional bosses, even just the look and feel of the architecture spoke to me in this game. Basically, the only problem I have with this game is some questionable story asides that don't really serve much of a purpose, and Tetramaster. Seriously, Tetramaster sucks. Ain't nearly as good as Triple Triad.
Final Fantasy IX is essentially a fond farewell to a style and generation of gaming that is held near and dear to so many hearts all over the world. I may not have known how I stood on this game walking into this project, but now, on the other side of it, I am so glad I took the time to revisit this one. This is the kind of game that never comes across as a chore to play. In the 2 months since I finished the game proper, I'm almost ready to fire it up again. And you should too. Seriously, if you haven't played it, you should play it. Seriously. Play it!